It's Shawn. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to talk about LLC agreement updates, things to review. This is such an important topic. It's timely. It's something that really most business owners need to be doing periodically. So if you haven't had your LLC agreement out in a while, it's time to dig through those electronic files or get that physical paper out, dust it off. And we're going to talk about things to review to see what might need to be updated in your LLC agreement. If you're coming back to the channel, we always appreciate your support. Thanks for being here. Hopefully you've subscribed, rung the bell for notifications so that you'll stay in the loop with us as we continue to give important lessons for business owners, business leaders, legal things that will be important to them. And if you're new to the channel, we really appreciate you stopping by. I hope you see value here. If you do, we have a whole library of videos that will help you be more effective. One of the things that is a common problem, is a common situation for many business owners, is their LLC agreement. Most of these are viewed as a once and done. You form your company, you get your LLC filed. Some people don't even go to the step of forming an LLC agreement. If that's something you've done, it's probably advisable for you to go ahead and set up an LLC agreement that reflects whatever your understanding is with respect to your LLC. We'll talk about some of those things that might go into the LLC agreement today as we talk about reviewing it. The things we're reviewing, obviously, are things that should be there in the first place. Some of you may have just filed a certificate with the state, right? So that could be as simple as your LLC is, and now you need an agreement. Others of you may have used a service or maybe a lawyer. You probably have something, but odds are, if you've been in business for a while, that thing's starting to probably get out of date. So it's time to go back and revisit that. We'll be talking about legal stuff. Obviously, laws vary by state, varies by your situation, your fact patterns. This is not legal advice. We're here to educate, get you some ideas, teach you things you can talk about, so you can go consult with the counsel of your choice about your situation, your company. Also, we do not do financial or investment advice on the channel. We do talk about those types of issues, but we always say go talk to your advisor. We're just giving you education and things to talk about. Very simple first question, are the names, addresses, parties right? And this is talking both about the LLC agreement, because usually there's addresses in the LLC agreement, names. Maybe somebody got married, maybe somebody transferred their interest, maybe a company has changed its name. All of these things can happen. One very common thing is that people move, businesses move. And so you probably have a registered agent provision in there. That's the person that gets sued if you end up, on the receiving end of a lawsuit. And there's usually a registered agent. That's the person that receives the lawsuit on behalf of the company, really starts the process going as far as having you on legal notice. That registered agent, very good chance, they may have moved, their address may have changed, the company may have used their address and the name of an officer, company may have moved locations. We've had that happen on more than a couple of occasions, and then nobody goes back and looks at this. So you want to look at that both in the LLC agreement. This is also one of the cases where you're going to go look at your certificate of formation, articles of formation, whatever it might be called in your state, whatever you file with the state. You got to see if that's up to date. And this is an area to be careful here because, service of process is important, right? You want to know if you're being sued so that you can get a lawyer and you can defend. You don't want a lawsuit going forward without your knowledge. You want to make sure that address is good. Now, for some states, not only do you have the certificate of formation file, but you may have an annual filing, some type of tax filing or notice filing about where the company is, what their address is. In many of these states, just filing that annual filing with the new address doesn't update the address. You do have to go back and amend the certificate. So you may be under the mistaken assumption that your addresses are up to date and everything's okay. So if you've moved, changed addresses, changed officers, check both the LLC certificate, check the LLC agreement. If you don't feel like bringing a lawyer in for something so small, call your state. Ask them, do I need to file a certificate of amendment? The filing offices, Secretary of States, or whatever it's called in your state may or may not like to give advice over the phone, but they usually will help, nice people with small issues. So if you call up and say, hey, am I supposed to file an amendment if I moved? Or did my annual filing of taxes update that address automatically? What do I need to do? Just call and be polite and work through it. So names, addresses, parties, is everything right? Maybe you've sold some interests. Maybe people have changed ownership percentages and you never updated the documents. You want to get all of that current. And you want to do these things before there's a problem. That's the whole point of these exercises is you want good, clean files in the event of a lawsuit, in the event of a business dispute, in the event of something bigger. You want to make sure you get that right. Has your asset situation changed? Do you now have different assets within the business or personally? And does the structure you have still work? Is it sufficient to protect your assets? Maybe when you were newer in business, you didn't want to do a lot of structuring with your real estate and your vehicles and other things because it just didn't seem cost effective. Your operations were small. You were trying to get off the ground. And now suddenly maybe your business is bigger. You want to look at whether that asset situation has changed such that you need to go back and update your LLC agreement, maybe your whole LLC structure and documentation. And maybe you need to think about the asset levels, both between your personal assets and the LLCs. How's your asset protection planning working vis-a-vis insurance in your company? So a good time to revisit that is, at least once a year, probably once a quarter. Look at all the numbers and figure out where you're at and revise things accordingly. Are you happy with your deadlock provision? So typically, multi-owner LLC will have a provision about what happens if the owners disagree. This is usually particularly important if you have voting blocks that are dividable by 2. So let's say you have 2 owners, both with 50-50 control. You've got a very pressing deadlock issue, right? Those 2 owners could disagree on the future of the business, and the business could get stopped and be in what they call a deadlock, unable to move forward because the owners disagree. It tends to come up again at 4. If you have 4 owners, again, 25, 25, 25, 25, you could get a 2-and-2 situation. We've seen that before. 2 are going one direction, 2 are going the other direction. Overall, you only have 50% of the votes. You don't have enough to move the company forward. Doesn't say it doesn't come up with odd numbers. Sometimes with odd numbers, we get voting blocks and voting situations. And we do see times where we have like a 50, 25, 25 as an ownership percentage. Well, the 2 25s could team up together and you end up in another situation where you have a deadlock. So you need to look at their percentage ownership interest. You got to look at the potential for a deadlock. And then you've got to say, okay, if we get in a situation where the owners disagree and we can't get to whatever consensus, usually it's 50% for a management decision. Sometimes it's higher. If we can't get to the threshold we need to move the company forward, what happens under our LLC agreement? And are we happy with that? The general rule, folks, too, and this underlies the entire video that we're doing today, you can change your LLC agreement voluntarily in almost all cases, unless you have like a loan agreement or something where you've agreed not to change your LLC agreement or go through some kind of special approval, maybe a unanimous consent, etc. In general, you can just agree to change the LLC agreement. So what's great is if you see a deadlock provision you don't like, you can fix it now, get a better provision in there before you end up in a deadlock. Because deadlocks, because you can't make decisions, sometimes the company ends up dying or getting hurt just from the inaction. So go back and review those deadlock provisions now in light of how the company's actually working. See if you're happy with them. And does the buy-sell work? Usually a companion to a deadlock provision. You have a provision, what happens if we end up in a disagreement, we can't move forward. You often also have a buy-sell provision. How does that work? What if one partner needs to buy out the other? Let's see we end up in a deadlock, and our deadlock provision doesn't break the deadlock, so the company can't make decisions. Usually the next logical step is to have one business owner buy out another to dislodge the deadlock and then to allow the company to move forward. These are often based on offerings. One person makes an offer to another person, then the second person accepts or rejects the offer. Could be based on formulas. What you want to do now is go back and look at that buy-sell and say, hey, does this work? Does it make sense in light of where we are? And do we need to update it, right? The time to update these things, again, is proactively. When you don't have a current dispute, when everything's good, the downside is people aren't paying attention to these things. The upside is if you are actually looking at your LLC agreement, updating it, while things are good, you can get better provisions in there, protect the company relatively easily. What happens in many cases, however, is when people aren't proactive, they aren't watching this video, or they don't go and do what this video says, is things will be fine with the company. Then some major decision or event will happen, which ends up having the owners in a deadlock or dispute. And there you could still possibly amend the agreement, but the problem is most people are not going to consent to an amendment at that time because nobody wants to give the other an advantage. So you got to look at that. And then the final piece is, have you done succession planning? Not just between the owners, but with the families. What happens when, an owner retires or dies or leaves the business? Where does that ownership go? What does that look like? Do you want the children of the owners coming into the business? Now, most cases these days, I don't think people do, but I have had clients have said that's fine, and that's what they've envisioned and wanted. And if the families have trust and respect, and they like each other, and they know each other, and they're willing to do business with each other, that's great. But you want to reflect all of that within your LLC documents, and that's something that generally needs to be updated periodically, because whatever you planned 10, 15, 20 years ago may not work today. Even if you're reviewing these periodically, you still want to go back and say, have situations changed? Do the families still have as much respect and trust as they did before? Have they changed the amount of respect and trust? What is moving forward in that planning scenario? Best time to do this is before it's an emergency, folks. And a lot of people wait until it's an emergency, then they pull out those LLC agreements. Good proactive business owners should be working with their lawyers, looking at that LLC agreement periodically, making sure it's up to date, make sure it works, making the amendments necessary, updating the files as necessary. This is going to save you a lot of hot water in the future, and probably most likely save you a lot of legal fees. So it's smart business. Would love to hear your comments. Obviously, don't put anything confidential in there, but would love to hear what you're facing in your business, in your world. I'll read through those comments. I try to reply to them, but really like to get some discussion going down there. So join me down there. And if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications, and then like this video if you enjoyed it so more business owners and leaders can see these types of topics. All right, folks, catch you soon.